let's talk about Jacques Vallée. So there's a chapter in your book where you mention, what I think was one of the most fascinating parts that stuck out to me the most was you go to his apartment in Northern California. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what happened there?
Yeah. So I know Jacques, and we've, worked together and are colleagues basically for a long time. And this one time I went to his apartment, and we were going to talk about the topic of the research that we were, his research, my research. Mm-hmm. And so he has a beautiful apartment and has an amazing view of San Francisco. And so we were in his apartment, and he showed me his library, which is really amazing. And he had a lot of, historical things from the history of ufology in the United States, and things from, European Catholic history, like looked like extant, copies of books about angels and things like that. So it was amazing, and things that belonged to Allen Hynek and things like that.
And Allen Hynek was the guy who started Project Blue Book.
Yeah, he was one of the people in the head of Project Blue Book, like the main scientist.
And Jacques worked with him?
Yeah, Jacques worked with Allen Hynek. Yeah. And they were both, part of the reason for that chapter was I wanted to talk about the mystical elements that each were interested in, which include, they were not affiliated with any Rosicrucian temples, but they were interested in Rosicrucianism.
What is Rosicrucianism?
So Rosicrucianism is an esoteric tradition that looks like it comes from about the early modern time period, but a lot of its practitioners say that it goes back to Egyptian times. But it looks like depending on which histories of it you read, you'll get a different perspective. But it looks to be started around the early modern time period among scientists who had to be really careful. In fact, the Invisible College comes from that early modern time period, and Francis Bacon basically doing work as a scientist. But at that time period, science was risky because you could be killed for doing it, so they called themselves the Invisible College. And so Hynek repurposed that term for his group of people that were studying UFOs. And you had to be careful of, because if you were a scientist and you came out as a person who studied UFOs, you were immediately discredited.
Hynek was one of the first guys to build this bridge between science and spirituality. Is that sort of the backbone of what this is about?
I don't know. I don't think he was one of the first guys, but he's definitely a well-known figure who's not known to have done that. And so there's a focus I put in the book on his melding of the two.
And you were shocked, I think, to see all of the books that he had on angels that were in his library.
I was.
Would you ask him about that? What did he say about that?
So in the library, he showed me a lot of books about, like I said, the history of ufology, historical stuff from Project Blue Book. And
right. That's the kind of stuff that I would expect to see in Jacques Vallée's library.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, but most of the library was dedicated to these very old books of angels. And so he took out a couple and he showed them to me. And he had a whole row of angels and a whole row of fallen angels type thing. And he made some jokes about it, well, if you have one, you have to have the other kind of thing. And I guess the emphasis, I know that he has a huge historical knowledge, obviously with Passport to Magonia. That's a book about the whole history of, kind of the Western history. It almost reads like a religious studies book about the the phenomena in history. And so, of course, I knew that he did have this knowledge. I just didn't know to the extent to which he studied it. So having these books, especially purchasing them and having them, you know, it's one thing to go to archives kind of like I do and read them. Mm-hmm. But to get them and to acquire them, to keep them in your own home, these are old books that require a certain, you know, they could disintegrate. The papers can disintegrate. So you have to have a climate-controlled environment. They're kind of difficult to keep. So he had a huge library of these books. So yes, so it just reconfirmed for me that the focus of that chapter should be on the spiritual elements in the history, and his focus on this esoteric tradition, as well as Hynek's focus on this esoteric tradition. It reconfirmed for me that was appropriate.
And he gave you a book at the end of your meeting with him that day. What was this book?
Okay, so
This book on the devil, right?
Well, it was a history of Satan.
Okay.
And it was done by these Carmelite nuns. And so he gave me the book and he said, you should try to acquire this book. It's really good. And I looked at it, and then the paging on it was really interesting. It was the last page was 666. So he laughed and said they had a sense of humor, you know? And so, yeah, that was, at the time I was really shocked by that. And thought it was, what? You know, so it took me a while to actually talk to him about it, because I thought, how do you ask somebody about this, right? So I did ask him, and he said that, you know, and he's right. So the way we see, he was basically suggesting it because of the ways in which, you know how the ways in which the UFO are made to look kind of a certain way, but when you look into it, they look different. And the same way with religious traditions, like Teresa of Avila's experience with the little angel. If you look at pictures and paintings from that, and the statue of that, it looks very different than the primary source material.
Okay, like the description that she actually gave when she wrote it.
Yeah, it looks completely different than what you call it, telephone game. Right? Yeah, so there's telephone game in texts too, right? Okay. And in representations of spiritual experiences. So basically he was saying that if you look at the history of this person, you know, well, not person, with this being, that it's going to look completely different. And the people that did the best biography are these Carmelite nuns who had access to all of the primary source material.
Did you read the book?
So I did look for the book, and I didn't do a hard search for it because I was so busy.
Right.
I haven't been able to, but I do want to acquire the book, absolutely. So no, I have not read it. But you know, his work is basically to look at these texts, just like my work is, to look at the primary sources and to create his own understanding of it instead of looking at what people say about these primary sources.
A da Ana Passuca é muito interessante que ela fala pelo seguinte, né? Eu anotei alguns pontos aqui. O primeiro desses pontos é essa questão do Colégio Invisível, né? O Jacques Vallée tem um livro chamado Invisible College, né? Colégio Invisível, em que ele fala justamente que na época, lá atrás, os cientistas não podiam falar sobre o assunto OVNI, né? Senão eles teriam as carreiras encerradas aí pela desinformação, pela comunidade de inteligência, difamando esses cientistas. E na época a ordem lá da CIA era justamente essa, né? Difamar quem falasse sobre o assunto. Teve até cientista que tirou a própria vida ali, como James McDonald, né? Então eles não podiam publicamente falar sobre o assunto, então eles tinham chamado Colégio Invisível, que era um grupo secreto de cientistas notáveis que se reuniam para discutir isso, e o Allen Hynek e o Jacques Vallée faziam parte desse grupo. E um outro ponto para eles manterem o sigilo é que eles misturavam ciência com espiritualidade. Então eles estudavam, por exemplo, os ensinamentos de Rosa Cruz e de outras doutrinas, né, para tentar explicações para aquela parte em que a ciência não conseguia explicar. Então isso acontecia já há muito tempo, e eles se escondiam por conta disso, né? E a gente vê isso até hoje, até os dias de hoje, sendo que hoje tem uma abertura muito maior, vários cientistas já têm dado a cara, aí, como o próprio Gary Nolan, como Avi Loeb, cientistas que tem, e o próprio Jacques Vallée, né, que tem vindo a público falar sobre o assunto. E outra coisa interessante, o Jacques Vallée tem uma biblioteca enorme lá eu lembro que o Allen Hynek cedeu para ele todo o seu acervo lá do Projeto Livro Azul e os documentos para o Jacques Vallée poder ajudar na pesquisa. E isso está lá na biblioteca dele, mas o curioso não é isso, né? O curioso é a gente saber que o Jacques Vallée tem na biblioteca dele livros muito antigos falando sobre anjos e demônios, né? A Paçuca fala que é dividido, né? O Jacques Vallée até brinca que tem que ter um equilíbrio. Se você tem livro de anjos, tem que ter o livro do demônio para poder equilibrar. E ela fala que é uma imensa biblioteca sobre esses livros, e interessante ele ter escolhido o livro sobre a história de Satanás para dar para Paçuca estudar e dizer que tem tudo a ver com esse assunto. Qual que era uma das intenções do Vallée quando ele fez isso, imagino eu, pelo que a Paçuca passou pra gente ali? Se a gente pegar vários relatos de seres, a gente está sempre modificando a aparência desses seres para caber em determinada cultura e determinada explicação. Esse da Teresa que ela falou, por exemplo, pegaram ali os seres que ela descreveu e criaram as estátuas, os desenhos para eles parecerem extraterrestres, por conta do livro Communion, do Whitley Strieber. Né? Quando publica-se o livro do Communion do Whitley Strieber, todos os pesquisadores começam a ficar muito focados nessa questão extraterrestre, de greys, e todo ser tinha que parecer com aquilo. Então todas as descrições de seres começaram a ser modificadas para poder parecer com seres greys, por exemplo. E é isso que a Paçuca está dizendo. Então, isso é uma deturpação da pesquisa, né? E qualquer característica que não parecesse com grey extraterrestre, os pesquisadores automaticamente ignoravam aquela determinada característica, né? Então, isso é uma coisa que a Paçuca quer passar. Uma das mensagens desse livro da história de Satanás que o Jacques Vallée dá para ela é justamente isso, né? Olha como há distorções nos relatos das pessoas em relação a esses seres. E quando você vai olhar os relatos, eles são muito mais parecidos com os relatos religiosos do passado, das fontes primárias, do que com os relatos atuais, né? Porque os relatos atuais são todos enviesados e tendenciosos para o lado extraterrestre. Uma das provas disso é o próprio caso Varginha, né? As meninas nunca falaram que os seres tinham aqueles olhos oblíquos enormes. Eles falaram que tinham olhos que eram 3 vezes maiores que os olhos humanos, mas nunca falaram que tinha aquele determinado formato. Vocês veem que os desenhos e as estátuas são todas puxadas por um grey, como se fosse um grey de olhos vermelhos, né? E com aquela cabeça característica, né? O que prova que já naquela época havia essa tendência de modificar os relatos para caber na caixinha extraterrestre. E aí, nesse mesmo papo do Danny Jones, ele fala com a Paçuca sobre o caso Varginha. É um trecho que eu nem tinha visto, eu vi esses dias, e aí eu vou colocar aqui pra gente poder mostrar para vocês o que eles falaram naquela época, 1 ano atrás, sobre o caso. Antes disso, tem um ponto aqui que é o livro, né? Que livro é esse que o Jacques Vallée mostrou para eles, né? O livro é do padre Bruno de Jesus Marie, é um livro de edição inicialmente em francês, na década de 40, e é um livro realmente de 666 páginas, né? O Jacques Vallée até comenta que esses padres tinham um bom senso de humor. Ele tem algumas ilustrações interessantes, vocês veem que no livro essas ilustrações sempre aparecem desses demônios, Satanás, enfim, como seres híbridos, né? Humanos com animais. Então você vê seres que têm braços, pernas, são seres humanoides, mas que têm características ali de animais, né? Uma face humana misturada com face de animal, e ali pernas e braços de animais, corpos peludos, enfim. O que é curioso em relação aos relatos de seres que são vistos ao longo do Brasil. Aí são algumas capas antigas do livro. Esse livro está para venda lá na Amazon, a versão mais atual, mas essas eram algumas capas antigas do livro aí do padre Bruno de Jesus Marie, com base no conhecimento carmelita, e foi redigido por freiras carmelitas também, né?